Welcome to the first of many webinars for our Local Administrative Advisor Program. My name is Liam Threlkill. I'm the Policy Analyst and Program Manager here at the League. And we have an awesome webinar planned for today on Open Public Meetings Act and how to run a meeting effectively. Gary Watcott, our Senior Advisor in the program, advisor for the Local Administrative Advisor Program, is going to be doing our training today. And he is a former city manager of South Jordan and has multiple decades of experience in local government. And we're excited to have him doing this training for us. And I'll turn it over to Gary now.
Okay, well, happy to be here, and we'll walk through some of these slides. And I just want to thank, there's a few people I've contributed to this slide deck and have helped me put this together, and some of them are actually legal people. So we have a good basis to draw from, and hopefully this will be, it's really down to the basics and can be easily understood. And but if you have questions, put them in the chat and we'll try to get to them as we move along through the program here today. So it's good to be with you all. So we are going to talk about the Open Public Meetings Act here in Utah. There we go. So this comes from the Utah Code section 52.4.101 for those of you that want to really dig deep and get into the law itself. That's the section that it comes from. And in that section, it defines the purpose of the act, which is pretty simple, which public bodies must conduct the public's business openly and with full transparency. And that is the intention of what the act is to do. Which is what we should all be doing anyway, as we think about what we're actually doing a meeting for, is to conduct the business of our residents and constituents. And the idea here is that there's full disclosure in all that we do, and that's the intention of the act. So then the question is what and who is a public body, and how does that defined? And these are the simple pieces of what the code actually says. Almost all of us involved in government are going to fall under this act. Very rare occasions would we not. But any administrative, advisory, executive, or legislative body that is created by the Utah Constitution, statute, rule, ordinance, or resolution, which pretty much is going to impact special districts, cities, towns, counties, state, anything where you're doing that, where there's two or more people meeting in this kind of business role, and you're going to expand or disperse any tax revenue supported monies. So not every council meeting obviously is expending or has a transaction of funds. However, a lot of towns and cities and special districts actually put their expense sheet out on their agenda and approve it every month. Not every community does that, obviously. So it doesn't really matter. You are doing that as you go along. So you're meeting the intent of that number 3, whether you have it on your agenda or not. You're still meeting and doing the business of the public with these things happening behind the scenes as well. So it is relevant and as required by the act. Number 4 is vested with the authority to make decisions regarding the public's business. And obviously any elected person and their appointees are all going to qualify for number 4. So those are pretty easy, not too hard to understand. Most of you probably already knew that information. So what is not a public meeting? Most of you probably had this training before and understand a chance or social gathering is not a public meeting. However, if you go down to the very bottom, but always err on the safe side should be the rule. I would suggest that anytime there could be a quorum present, whether it's social or not, I would notice the meeting. And we'll get into noticing a little bit more into the presentation, but it's not considered a real public meeting. So not all of the rules and formality needs to be in place, but in my experience, we always posted and put on the Utah Transparency website our meeting if there was a chance meeting to get together, which could be a ribbon cutting, even a ribbon cutting of a business, not even have to be a city business. It could be a chamber business, but if you think you're going to be there and 3 of you or more or whatever makes a quorum, then you should probably notice the meeting just to be completely open about it. If you're convening a meeting when no public funds are appropriated and no formal action is taken, technically it's not a public meeting. But once again, to avoid any view by the public that you're doing something secretively or not really informing them, I would always err. Notice the meeting. It's not a big deal to do it, and that would be our recommendation. So we've all heard about emergency meetings. They're not common. Typically, city councils have them or other bodies may have the meeting. But these notice requirements for emergency meetings should only be held if it really meets the definition of being urgent. Something really coming forward that requires this meeting. The public body must still give at least its best notice, and that's where most people take some scrutiny from the public. Well, there wasn't any notice of the meeting. And obviously, if it's an emergency meeting, there's not enough time. So this is where it gets a little rough. But you still have to make notice, even if it's 2 hours before the meeting or an hour before the meeting. And then final action really can't be taken if you're not really following the idea of providing some notice. Emergency meetings may not be held unless an attempt has been made to notify all members of the body and the meeting is approved by a majority of that body. Hence, they're trying to protect people from just throwing a meeting together without all of the council or the elected body being notified of the meeting. And so you do have to and should, through your recorder, make sure you've noted in the minutes of that emergency meeting who was notified, how many attempts were made to notify, and if someone was not able to be actually notified. Hopefully that makes sense. Very rare. I think in my whole career, I've seen 1 or 2 of these in 30 years. So they don't happen often, but that doesn't mean they won't. So just be aware of some of the things you have to do. You still, even in an emergency, have to notice and give best notice of the meeting. That's probably the best thing to know. So let's walk through what the Act requires us to do. Most of you already follow these basic principles, but you have to notice the meeting at least 24 hours in advance. I would suggest that most of us do more than that. But oftentimes, last minute changes to the agenda occur. You're still required to give at least 24-hour notice. If you can, that's the best practice. The agenda should and must include the date, time, and place of the meeting. And annual notice of regularly scheduled meetings should be posted. So I don't know, this may be a little bit more obscure, maybe not too many people know about that, but you are supposed to approve all of your meetings that you're going to have, whether they're city council meetings, board meetings, a year in advance. They're always subject to change if they have to, and you can make notice properly for those. But they should be given a whole year in advance. So, and annually you post those meeting dates and times and places. And then the Act also requires written minutes and recordings of all open meetings must be given public access, which I think we all know. A majority in a 5-member council, I think Trent Jackson, you're asking that question. Typically that's 3. I would say that depending on what your ordinances say, I mean, you could have it be a simple majority or a super majority, which would require 4. It depends on how your city operates. But typically it's just a simple majority, which would be 3. Okay, let's talk about, because it is required to have meeting minutes. Let's talk about what the minutes should be and include. The minutes of a public meeting must include the date, time, and place of the meeting, the names of members present and absent. Typically, also number 2, I think the statute really talks about the board members or the council members or those that are running the meeting or making decisions for the meeting. But it also is a good practice to ensure that everyone that's in attendance to the meeting is listed as best you can. A lot of city councils have a sign-up sheet or they sign in when they come to the meeting. That should be included in your minutes as well, of all who attended, if possible. Oftentimes, that's not an exact science, but it's a good practice, because what the code's really saying is it's the names of members present and absent, and their members are the members of the council or the board or the decision-making board. It's the legislative members. The substance of all matters discussed should be included. People often say, well, how detailed should my minutes be? And as you notice down at the bottom in blue, the minutes are yours, meaning the minutes are the legislative body's minutes. So you should be happy with them. In my career, I've seen council members change and actually be less detailed in the minutes to going back to being more detailed. And it's just a matter of having that discussion, and you should, particularly maybe this time of year coming up in January when you have maybe newly elected people that are part of the council now, are part of your board. You should be asking that question about minutes so that everybody has an understanding of what's the expectation is going to be. You should always record each vote that's taken, and who and how the vote was taken. We get a little bit more into when we conduct a meeting about that. There's ways to how you should, it's recommended that you ask for the vote. But in this case, for minutes, you should always record who made the minutes. The motion, second, and who voted, and what their voting was. So name of each person who testified or commented to any of the items on the agenda. That should be noted in your minutes. I know I've been to a lot of different council meetings. A lot of people ask the resident or the person who's testifying or presenting material, give their name and where they reside or those kinds of things. It doesn't necessarily have to have a requirement of the residency, but it does require the name of the person in the statute. Anything else that a member requests be entered into the minutes. Once again, these are your minutes. You should be comfortable with what the minutes represent. And clearly, I think most of us all want the minutes to be able to represent what actually happened that night in the meeting or that day in the meeting. So I think that's the goal, is that if we come back and we read these minutes a year later, we could get a feel for what was happening and what did happen and what was accomplished. So that's the idea of the minutes. Hopefully that makes sense. recordings of the meeting and the council meeting. It does require that recordings must be complete and unedited, be properly labeled with the date and time and place of the meeting, and the recording is not the minutes. The minutes are not the recording. And these recordings go away in 3 years under the Grandma Act. And just know that, you know, the minutes stand for much longer time, the written minutes. And both should be available for public review. So on continuing with minutes and recordings, pending minutes and the recordings are public records under the Grandma Act. Pending minutes must be available to the public within 30 days of the meeting. Approved minutes must be available to the public within 3 days after the approval. So hopefully you've been following those guidelines. Audio recordings must be available to the public within 3 days. So there are requirements for your recordings and your minutes. And hopefully your recorders are following these guidelines. So we often have closed meetings. So why can a closed meeting be closed? What are the reasons for a closed meeting? So we can have a discussion of character, competence, and physical and mental health of an individual, collective bargaining, pending or imminent litigation, purchase of real property. There is some areas in there that, in that one, that may not pertain. That's always best to run that by an attorney on that particular one. But for most cases, you can do that for obvious reasons if you're acquiring real property. If you're talking about your security systems within your city government or your whatever your entity is, whether that's security systems for your water or other public infrastructure or your computer systems, whatever, but you can close your meeting for security. Criminal misconduct investigations fall under this as well, and certain procurement discussions. I've not seen too many of those unless they're procurement related imminent litigation issues, but there are times when your procurement code or a procurement issue can be discussed in a closed meeting. And I once again would suggest you talk to your attorney about when that kind of a situation arises to make sure you're within the realm of legality there. So we also, in today's world, we have electronic meetings, and electronic meetings have some requirements. So a body must adopt an ordinance regarding electronic meetings in order to hold them. The ordinance should outline the use of electronic meetings for each body. And what they're saying there is if you have more than one legislative body, or in some cases of a city, you have a planning commission, you may want to have different rules for different bodies. It gives you that flexibility. But the reality is you have to have an ordinance within your community to allow you to have electronic meetings. Except in limited situations involving safety and welfare, a body must have an anchor location, which usually requires at least one member at the location for the meeting. And then once again, proper notice and a vote to hold the electronic meeting. So most everybody should have an ordinance in place if you're going to have electronic meetings. And then what this is saying is not everybody, there should be an anchor location, and at least one person should be at that anchor location during the electronic meeting. And that's what the rule says in statute. Okay, grandma and your operations, pending minutes, approved minutes, and recordings are all public records under grandma. I think most of us understand that. In fact, get inundated quite often with all the grandma requests. So electronic communications between members are subject to grandma. I don't know, this is an interesting one, including those sent during meetings, but not necessarily about public business. So elected officials sitting on a DS, you may want to certainly be concerned about what you're texting or emailing during the city council meeting. Because this is telling you right here, they're subject to grandma, and it doesn't necessarily have to be about the business of that night. It could be what you're texting because you're doing it during the meeting. And that's the difference. You're in a public setting, you're in a public meeting, and anything you're doing during that time frame is subject to grandma. So just be aware of that one. All right, so in summary, public bodies must conduct the public's business openly and with transparency, and that is the real intention of the act. And so all of the things that we do are basically to serve that purpose. A public meeting is a body convening with quorum present for the purpose of doing public business. And a quorum needs to be defined. And that's another item that should probably be in your municipal code is what do you consider a quorum? Is that 2? Is that 3? Is that 4? And you probably really should know what that is. And then minutes and recordings are required for most public meetings. I would say really, I wouldn't try to split hairs. I would say really all of the meetings and are subject to rules of grandma, and at least conduct the meeting as though they were. A public meeting can be in person or electronic. And remember, if you're going to do electronic meetings, you have to have an ordinance that spells out the rules and why and how it's done in your community. A social or chance gathering is not a public meeting. Once again, my recommendation would be that you still put the meeting and notice the meeting as your council or a board is actually meeting. Are there any questions about any of this? It's not a super challenging act to follow. And I think that most of us know what the rules are. Just a few odd ones there that we want to be sensitive to. The second part of this meeting is to talk a little bit about how to run an effective meeting, whether it's board meeting, council meeting, or other public meetings. And I'll take just a minute to switch out my slide deck here. Okay, moving right along, we'll start on this particular item, number 2, best practices to running a city council meeting. And it can pertain to any kind of a public meeting, really. So if you want to get technical, what is a council meeting? What does it really mean? And all councils enact ordinances. They enact an ordinance or resolution. It's just conducting that city's business. These are all the things that fit into the reason why we have these meetings in the first place is to do the business of the community. And depending on your form of government, some councils have additional authority to approve contracts, final appeal on planning commission rulings, hire city managers. All of these things you see on this slide, procedures for conducting a council meetings vary from city to city. However, there are some common practices that are followed by most councils. The mayor, the city council members, and staff will have different roles and responsibilities as we think about running an effective meeting, we want to make sure we all understand what our roles are there and who's doing what portion of the meeting and how that's done. Typically, we all look at those things from a different point of view. And the chair of the meeting, to run an effective meeting, really needs to know what each person is doing. Hey, Liam, I'm showing 4 people in chat. Do you see some questions in there? No? Okay. I don't want to miss anybody. So often then, there needs to be somebody in charge of the meeting. So who is in charge of our meeting? The chairperson's role is critical, obviously, that to make the meeting work right and maintain order and ensuring that the meeting runs smoothly and fairly. Most cities in Utah, the mayor has the statutory duty to run a city council meeting. Now, that's not every forum might have some different minor tweaks to that, but generally speaking, the mayor runs the meeting, and as the chair, has the discretion to run the meeting really how they want to. Hopefully, mayors are talking to council members and staff, and they're all coming together on the best way that they feel is the most efficient way to work the meeting for their community. And then there's always got to be somebody in charge. So if the mayor is not going to be able to attend to run the meeting, then the council should elect a mayor pro tem to act in the place of the mayor for that meeting or a time frame, whatever the case requires. So I think that's pretty self-evident that we want somebody in charge of the meeting. So rules to be used, if any. What are the rules of having a public meeting? What are the best practices? So rules of order for public meetings should help manage the conduct of the city council. They should not get in the way of translating people's business or transacting. I just put that in there because we could create a lot of rules, and the rules shouldn't get in the way of doing the people's business. We don't want to be so rule heavy that people come and go, this is so bureaucratic. I don't feel like I'm even being heard. I don't even have a way to get to the podium. But on the other side of it, to keep decorum in place, there needs to be a certain set of ground rules. So we should have rules that should establish and maintain order by providing a clear framework for the conduct of the meeting. So if you look at most city council meetings, there's usually some rules like please turn off your cell phone or these kinds of things that help provide the right decorum for the meeting to take place and be respectful of everybody who's attending the meeting. The rules should spell out if you're going to provide a time frame for people to work in, or they only get so many minutes to speak, or all of those should be listed where it's easily seen and understood by all those who are attending the meeting. So once again, rules should be clear and simple, facilitating a wider understanding and participation. We want people to come to our council meetings. We want people to participate. We want to hear from them, but we don't want to make our rules overburdensome. Rules should be user-friendly, meaning they should be simple enough that residents feel able to participate in the process. So once again, a lot of these can be really formalized through ordinances. And if you want certain things to be done a certain way, mostly, and I've seen them in practice, is that council members and mayors and staff talk about these rules and create that environment that they're comfortable with and the rules that apply to them. So what about Robert's Rules of Order? We've heard them, we've heard about them, we've probably seen some modified version of them and participated in meetings where they're used. And I would suggest they're probably good. I don't know too many places that use them completely as they're written. There's some modification to Robert's rules, and that's probably a good thing. I think they can get really cumbersome and if we follow every single thing that they suggest. But some order is necessary. And the rules and principles outlined in Robert's rules help ensure that the meetings are conducted efficiently, fairly, and respect to the rights of all participants, including those on the board or the council. So it's a way of kind of providing etiquette, if you will, and decorum, and everybody has an expectation of how they should, act in the meeting, and have a fairly good idea of how the vote works and things of that nature, or how are we going to approve a motion and things like that. And it's important for the chair to follow the rules that you've all set up to do. So I thought it'd be helpful if we looked at some of the important pieces of Robert rules, what they would be applied to and how. Not to just throw you to the wolves of the book, but to say, well, let's look at it from these perspectives. One is like meeting structure. Robert's Rules provides a framework for structuring meetings, including the order of business, the handling of various types of motions, and the roles and responsibilities of participants. I really think we don't have to get crazy about this, but if I was a mayor, I would want to at least try to look at all of these pieces and parts and try to structure the meeting in a way that makes sense, and that there's some sense of order and formality to the meeting, especially the city council. You don't want it too loose. You want it, and you don't want it so strict. There's that balance you're trying to strike here. So parliamentary procedure defines the rules of those how to govern meetings are conducted, how decisions are made. These are why you want to use these. How debates are managed, so things just don't get out of control or look unprofessional. And it gives context to how city council members debate issues, and then more importantly, how they vote on issues. So the book outlines how to introduce and debate motions. It actually goes through it step by step. You don't have to follow every part of that, but I would suggest making some of these rules apply to your meetings. It even goes into subsidiary motions, categorizes them. And if someone makes a substitute motion, how do you deal with that? And how does the order work? It's probably good to know some of these pieces of it. It also helps having these rules in place and having a kind of a formal format to follow. It helps your recorder with the minutes. And it helps people who are reading and listening to the meeting afterwards understand and feel how the meeting went through its process and how did a vote actually happen. And voting is important. And all council members would tell you is they have to vote on items that their constituents are concerned about how they vote on different topics. So this talks about how are you going to conduct, when are you going to conduct a voice vote? When are you going to show of hands? Or when are you just going to call for the question and use an A or an I or an A? You should have these already now and use them consistently throughout your meetings over the time you're in service. How does a resolution get adopted? The Robert's Rules apply to these. And then once again, defining a quorum, which quite frankly, I think a quorum should be defined. It could be defined in statute as well as it could be defined through your ordinance as a city. And then lastly, Robert's Rules establishes a hierarchy of motions and indicating which motions take precedence over others and so forth. And it's just good practice to use these rules. So just talking about elements of an effective meeting, let's just kind of walk through a few of these things, and you can determine whether you need them, you're doing them, or you want to add them or think they're good ideas. So we want to make sure we talked a little bit about this before, create a detailed agenda listing all the items to be discussed and acted upon during the meeting. This is really important. And I would suggest that you keep your agendas the same almost every week, not the same items, obviously, but the same order, how you conduct business. Is it, we're gonna have public comment first, then we're going to have public hearings, or, you know, however you're going to do it. That order of business, you should probably keep the same as best you can. And then the next one is prioritizing items and allocating time for each item to help the meeting stay on schedule. I think that in the agendas I had things to do with, we always estimated a time for that agenda item. We always put a note on the agenda that says these times are approximate, and we may or may not be completely accurate, right? So, but I do think it's good to kind of give an idea of when we think that item may be heard, and giving some time limits so that you can get through the meeting in a timely manner. And then providing the agenda council members and the public in advance. Our council meetings I was in part of were always held on Tuesday. And so we always published the agenda on Friday. That was our rule internally that we all felt comfortable with. It gave plenty of notice to council members as well as to the public. So everybody wants to know what's on the agenda, what's in the packet, and they want time, you want council members time to be able to read the material in the packet and understand what they're voting on. And if they have questions, have time to either contact staff, contact other members of who's ever presenting an item, whatever it is, that they have time for that. So choose a time. Most of us all have city halls or a place that we hold these meetings. We want to make sure the public has access, and that includes, you know, disability accesses as well. You want everybody in your community to be able to be there. As I said before in the previous, it's required that all your meetings are listed, their time and place, a year in advance. So hopefully that's being done. And this is just a good element to remind you that these are elements of a good meeting. Notify council members, staff, and the public about the meeting well in advance. We talked a little bit about that already. Chairperson's role: designate a council member as the chairperson or mayor to preside over the meeting. There are a lot of cities have rules that really outline this. And like I said earlier, I think even statutorily, most mayors have the duty to be the chair of the meeting. So these things are kind of already done. But if you're needing a mayor pro tem, that should be done or as early as possible. Also a good idea to do a roll call. Everybody does this a little bit differently. I sit on boards now that they do a roll call on the record, and every person has to designate whether they're here or not. I've been in other meetings where the mayor goes, we're all present, all council members are present and are here tonight, and all of our staff is present. Or they might say council member so-and-so is not here tonight and has been excused. But the idea is that the record reflects and the recorder's putting in the minutes that somebody was not there. So it's up to the chair on how they want to do a roll call. I'm suggesting in doing an effective meeting that you provide some means of a roll call. This is usually the second item on the agendas I've been familiar with, is to approve the minutes of the previous meeting. Somewhere in your agenda, you should at least be approving minutes. And it was always good timing, we thought, to do it at the beginning of the meeting. So shortly after our public comment period, we would approve the minutes. But it doesn't have to be anywhere else, but it can be anywhere in the agenda. It doesn't have to be at the top. That's up for the chair to decide how you want to do it. They just should be part of it. And then obviously we're there for the public's and the public's business. I think most elected officials want to hear from the public, unfiltered, which sometimes is painful, and other times it's quite rewarding. But it's always good to hear and give an opportunity. It should be noted here, though, that the public comment period typically is, what I'm suggesting here is a public comment period isn't a public comment for a public hearing. This is just an open public comment period that they can come and talk about anything that's not a public hearing on the agenda. So if they have a complaint about their sidewalk in front of their home, or something about the park, or they had a bad experience with an employee, I guess if they want to bring it here, they can. But that's the idea. And typically, most mayors or most chairs of the meeting will set a time limit to, you have 3 minutes, or you have 4 minutes, or 2 minutes, whatever is relevant for your meeting agenda that you have in front of you. Most of the time for my meetings, the mayor would suggest a 3-minute time for most residents. If there's very few of these, a lot of times you have a lot of public comment, and a lot of times you don't. So I think being flexible is the key here on time. And then obviously, most people do this, but during the part of the agenda where you're talking about items, you should have presentation or reports that are included, staff reports that allow the staff and who's ever worked on the project to present and provide updates, and any other data that's imperative for the vote to take place on an item, whether it's a public hearing or some other type of issue being approved. So discussion and action on agenda items. Follow the agenda's order, allowing council members to discuss and debate each item. You know, sometimes these items are very hotly debated and they're very controversial, and they can also eat up a lot of time. So it's at the chair's discretion, however, but I would recommend that you be careful about letting enough debate that the issue is well heard, but not allowing the item to go so long that we're belaboring the item and we're not really making progress. We've heard each other's statements and then we just keep rehashing them. When we're at that point, we need to really probably move on. A lot of these are strictly at the chair's discretion, but I think in a good, effective meeting, we got to remember that there are other items after these things that are happening, and there are people sitting in the audience, perhaps, waiting for their item to be heard. And I think that we need to be mindful of those who are attending our meeting. And we want good debate. We want the issue to be well heard and well discussed. But on the other hand, we don't want to go so far as it involves the entire meeting over one issue. If you think you're going to have one of those kinds of issues on an agenda, maybe it's on its own agenda, or it's something where you have a really short agenda and that one item or something. So you have to make sure we're moving the item along through taking motions and amendments of the motion or whatever, and then voting to make decisions. Most use a simple majority. Some cases a supermajority is required. Not often in most city business is a supermajority required. Mostly it's just a simple majority. Public hearings. Public hearings are always interesting. And and this is why most people come to a city council meeting, is the only time they come, more likely, is because there's something being zoned in their backyard and they want to make a comment about it. So public hearings, usually, and the agendas that I was familiar with, stand alone, have a section on public hearings. And if there's public hearings, and you generally know if they're going to be controversial or not, don't put so many public hearings on that you can't get through an agenda timely. You might have to be very wise about how many meetings of these that you put on one agenda. But you want as many people to speak, we want everyone to be heard. But I've often seen where the chair will use his or her discretion on how long a public hearing will be heard. And I've heard a lot of mayors say something like, if you're speaking for more than one, I'll give you 5 minutes instead of 3. And the idea here is that you're not having the same people come up and repeat the same comments over. I've heard mayors say, has anybody got anything else to say that we have not already heard? We don't want to regurgitate the same things over and over again. So these are all things that the chair can do to help move the meeting along or keep the public hearing from being bogged down by the same comments over and over again. And once again, the chair has a lot of discretion on how to operate these types of meetings, including the items within the meeting, like public hearings. I think the other thing that you want to do, and I think at least the experience I've had, is council members really like the idea that they can comment to the public in a general fashion, whether it's reporting on meetings that they've attended, what they've been doing, what is important to them, sharing information about things that are going on in the community, excuse me, or whatever. But in the agendas that I prepared, we always had time for council members, and we always provided staff comments as well. At least the city manager had time to present any other information that was not on the agenda. So these 2 items I think are really enhance your meetings if you give these 2 items, and they can really be effective. I mean, you don't want grandstanding by council members or somebody getting up and giving, 2 hours worth of information. But to take 5 minutes and explain what they're doing, I think helps residents feel like their council members are doing things and they get an idea of what's happening and what they're participating in. So it can be good. And oftentimes it gives the staff an opportunity to update the council on things that they may not really know what's happened in the last 2 weeks since they met before. And then lastly, you want to have an adjournment and officially end the meeting. And that's typically done by the chair. So. And that's what we have. Is there any questions about any of those ideas or thoughts, or anybody have any? Well, it's been great to be here with you today, and these are the 2 items that we hope will be helpful to you. I think these will be available to those that want to download them or look at them again, and you always have access to be able to review them. So hopefully they'll be helpful to you in the future as well. So thank you. Appreciate you being here today.